Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Here is Pawel from Better World International, and today with me I have a special guest. His name is Andrew Weaver, and Andrew, basically, this is a pretty cool story about you and what you already have done and accomplished, and how you fight about the better world. So that's my pleasure to have you here, and I definitely have some question for you about the climate change and things like that. So I would like to welcome you here. Glad to have you here.
Thank you for having me. It's the honor and pleasure is mine.
Cool. Okay, Andrew. So we know that you are author of two books, "Keeping Our Cool" and "Generation Us," which are talking mostly about the climate change and things like that. So first of all, could you tell me how's that happened that you get very interested in the climate change, and what's your story behind that?
Well, I actually started off doing in high school. I was good at physics and mathematics, and I continued on to do a PhD in applied mathematics. And I always wanted to do applied mathematics that was relevant to people. In school and in university, I didn't hang around a lot with the mathematicians and physicists. I had a lot of friends in the sports that I played in. I played a lot of rugby, etc. And I liked to talk about what I was doing. So I wanted to look for an area of physics and maths that was actually relevant to people. And that area was initially in the area of understanding the physics of the ocean. And then it moved into the physics of the ocean and the atmosphere and their interaction. And that naturally led to the issue of, looking at climate science and air sea interaction. So I got my PhD in 1987, and I started off at McGill in 1989, working on the role of the ocean in climate change and climate variability. And my real foray into climate science, per se, at the international level was when I was asked to be part of the United Nations steering group on global climate models. So what it was a UN group that actually was tasked with assessing our understanding of the ocean components as well as the atmospheric components of these climate models. And I was brought in for ocean model expertise. From there, it just took off. I got involved in the second scientific assessment of the IPCC, the third, the fourth, and the fifth. And I've been involved working in the area for quite some time until very recently.
Could you tell me, because I know about the UN and we basically can observe them, what is going on inside? Are those really action that those people taking there are really trying to solving this big global challenges? Is it really actually solving those problems?
Well, there's two aspects to that. First off, the United Nations committee that I served on was called the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Now, what that was doing is it was tasked with assessing our understanding of the science, the impacts and adaptive capability, as well as means and ways that we can mitigate climate change. So every 5 years or so, this big assessment was put out towards that is used and fed towards international policymakers. And there, the scientists, I would argue, have done their job on this problem. If you look at the key scientific metric, that is something called climate sensitivity, which is essentially how much would the world warm if we doubled atmospheric carbon dioxide levels? Okay. Well, the best estimate of that is 1.5 to 4.5 degrees, and that hasn't changed in more than 35 years. So the science has done well, I would argue, and done a fine job defining the problem. But at the political arena, it's been nothing but a mess. So we've had agreement after agreement after agreement for aspirational goals. But what really matters is not aspirational targets, but policy. So we have, for example, a collective agreement in Paris last year saying that the world would try and do what it can to keep warming below 2 degrees, substantially below 2 degrees. But then, all the political leaders of the world, after signing this and stating that they'll do it, go back to their homes and it's business as usual. Well, what people need to know, of course, is that we've already warmed by 1 degree. We know that if we do no more than just keep existing levels of carbon dioxide fixed at the values they are, we'll warm by another 0.6 degrees. We know that there's a permafrost carbon feedback, which will add about a 0.2 to 0.3 degrees. So we know we're already at 1.8 to 1.9 degrees. So what that says is it says to political leaders, if you actually believed what you said, then it makes no sense to continue to invest in multi-generational fossil fuel infrastructure projects, because those, we know that more than 80% of existing reserves have to stay in the ground. So there's collective cognitive dissonance. Politicians say whatever they want, but they don't have to live the consequences of their decisions, because the people who do are the next generation. And therein lies the fundamental problem.
Exactly. I completely agree. And Andrew, so what will happen, or maybe let's start from this one. What is the actual problem when the temperature decreases? Could you tell us what's happening? What is the problem? What's happening right now?
Well, we know that the rate of change of climate today is unparalleled in much longer than the existence of humans on Earth. It's essentially unparalleled in as long as we have records. Mm-hmm. We're essentially taking the atmospheric carbon that was locked into the Earth over tens of millions of years and releasing it on the timescale of a few decades. The rate of change of temperature is very dramatic, and associated with that are precipitation patterns. So too fast, for example, for most ecosystems to be able to adapt. So we're starting to see the demise of coral reef systems. For example, the Great Barrier Reef, it's on its way out. We're seeing the sixth greatest extinction event occurring as we speak, where species extinction is increasing. We're putting stress on water availability because we know that the change in precipitation and water availability is such that wet regions get wetter and dry regions get drier. So we can get increased likelihood of droughts, for example, in lower latitudes, which puts pressure on people that's access to water, which then puts pressure on geopolitical instability. Just take Lake Chad, for example. So surrounded by a number of nations. That lake is on the path towards drying up, and once it's dried up, there'll be issues with water. And then that sows the seeds for tension. So when I've been asked many times, what are the big reasons why I'm concerned about climate change? And I would say it's twofold. Number one, it's the rate and extent of species extinction. And number two, geopolitical instability that will arise, is already arising as a direct consequence of climate change and the inability of some people to live where they used to be able to live.
Andrew, why this is happening? Why we have this problem?
We know the cause of global warming. We know that 1/3 of the problem has been because of deforestation and the adding of that carbon through slash burning and burning into the atmosphere, and 2/3 of it has come from the combustion of fossil fuels. That is, when we combust fossil fuels, we're essentially releasing the carbon that was stored from tens of millions of years ago into the atmosphere immediately. And we know that we've known since the early 1800s that atmospheric carbon dioxide is a very effective greenhouse gas. That is, it's essentially transparent to incoming solar radiation, but is quite effective at blocking outgoing long-wave radiation. That is the radiation that the Earth emits to space. And so carbon dioxide acts like a blanket to keep the Earth warm, and we're adding more layers to that blanket, making it warmer and warmer and warmer.
Okay, so in case of the fossil fuels, I understand this is everything what we use for our cars. I understand this is all the things that we use for producing plastic, because what I know, the plastic is produced from fossil fuel, and also probably the energy business, or delivered the energy to our houses. Some of those are produced from fossil fuels, and this is everything would causing this. Am I right in case of the fossil fuels?
Yes, but except the plastics. Fossil fuels are indeed used in the formation of plastics. But the good thing about plastics is if you don't burn them, that fossil fuel is still stored. It's not released to the atmosphere. So it is the burning, the combustion of fossil fuels that creates the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And it is that is the problem. Plastics have other problems in terms of pollution, and if you burn them in waste energy facilities, but otherwise they're not contributing to global warming.
Andrew, I would like to ask you, because I know you are involved right now in the political stuff as well. So I just cannot understand those few things. I remember that was the scientists are telling people that we have the problem with the global warming and with the climate change, and I remember that those big discussions when some people were convincing us that the global change is not real, it's not happening, it's a crap, it's a lie, and they providing all those things. I cannot understand why they did it. Doing this.
I will never try to get into the brains of other people and try to figure out why they do what they do. But I will say that the scientific community has been saying the same thing for years and years and years. The world is warming at an alarming rate as a direct consequence of the combustion of fossil fuels. We know that is what it is causing. There are those who, and so the problem is that there are those in our society who believe whatever they believe, and they're what they do is they end up moving into the realm of what I call decision-based evidence making, as opposed to evidence-based decision making. In science, you seek a problem. You see a problem, and you seek the evidence by studying it to explain that problem and try to make a prediction that you can test it in another situation. In the process of decision-based evidence making, you've already made up your mind. So you go around skirting around trying to find some information that will back your view, ideological view, and move on accordingly. So there's a number of reasons. First and foremost is that when you try to bring in new technologies, let's take the vehicle, for example. Think about it. The car is the standard gas car is essentially technology that's over 100 years old. I'm like, really, are we not smarter to build things that, other than the internal combustion engine that has, little parts, pistons being powered by explosions moving up and down? We've done that for 100 years. We've put men on the moon. We could have put women on the moon, but we didn't. But we put men on the moon since then because JF Kennedy said we must. We've had cell phones. We've had laptop computers. Human ingenuity has been marvelous, yet we're still driving vehicles powered by explosions, moving pistons that require a lot of maintenance. I would argue that the reason why we're doing that is because attempts to bring in the alternative meet resistance from vested interests. Now, I have an electric car. Frankly, I don't know why everyone doesn't have one, because it is the most amazing thing to drive. I have no oil and filter change. I have no exhaust system to worry about, no radiator, no water pump. It just runs. And it costs me nothing to run because our electricity, and it's clean because we get our electricity from hydro. So there's the problem. So you start to get people would start to be resistant to you can imagine with the car coming in, because there is an infrastructure there. There's oil that gets dug out of the ground. It has to be refined and delivered and distributed to gas stations where you go in and you also buy some other stuff, your lottery ticket and maybe a pop and a sandwich. And then because it's moving parts, it's got a lot of oil and filter changes. And so there's a whole infrastructure that would have to move away if we move to the electrification of our vehicular sector. So therein lies the reason why there's often resistance. When you try to bring in new technologies, that meets resistance. And so go back and search their quotes. Climate was cooling, this and that, and see how often they've changed their tune. Then go back and look at what the climate scientists have been saying. We've been saying the same thing exactly for more than 20, 30 years.
Okay, Andrew, so we were talking about this United Nations, and that was super interesting subject for me because I only know about outside world of United Nations, and I have no idea what's going on there inside. And is it really helpful? And you were speaking about agreement after agreement after agreement.
Right. We have a very important agreement that was reached in the fall of last year, the so-called Paris Agreement. Now, what leaders committed to at that, essentially every leader in the world committed to at that agreement, was to ensure that we keep global temperatures substantively below 2 degrees. Mm-hmm. So that's a bold target. Then they go back to their countries and they have to implement their voluntary reduction plans to actually get there. And more of the same happens. So we know that unless we take steps now, they're simply not going to reach that target. We know, for example, the world has already warmed by about 1 degree. We know that if we do no more than keep existing levels of greenhouse gases constant today, we have about another 0.6 degrees warming. 0.6 degrees.
Oh my God.
0.6.
Okay.
So we know we're at 1.6 degree warming. Now add another 0.2 to 0.3 degrees from a permafrost carbon feedback. And we know that if all we do is keep the present levels of greenhouse gases fixed at just over 400 parts per million, we're going to warm by 1.8 to 1.9 degrees. So that should be a wake-up call for international policymakers. What that means is that if you actually truly believe the agreement that you signed in Paris, then that means that we should collectively as a society no longer invest in any new fossil fuel infrastructure anywhere in the world because it is simply incompatible with meeting the 2 degree target. That is we need to keep 80% of known fossil fuel reserves in the ground. They're stranded assets, and let's move on. So I take Canada, for example, and compare that to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has access to conventional oil. Canada and the United States have very little conventional oil left. They have access to large quantities of unconventional oil. It's very easy to get conventional oil out of the ground, which is why the Saudis are essentially flooding the market with easy to access conventional oil, recognizing obviously that if we're going to meet this international agreement, then that unconventional oil will never come to market, because of the fact is that we can't bring it there because we're going to break our 2-degree target. So instead of, the problem here is that we collectively are all racing to the bottom to see if we can't somehow keep doing what we're doing and pretend that we're going to make the 2-degree target, rather than recognizing the incredible opportunity that is there to transform our energy systems from those that are polluting to those that are not.
I just want to understand, what is the difference between conventional oil and unconventional oil? Like conventional is this, the usual petrol, gas, and this is what is accessible for everybody?
Conventional oil is basically oil that's in the ground. You just need to pump it out of the ground. Unconventional oil is oil that, for example, is in shales, so you have to fracture the shale to get it out, or it's in the bituminous sands in Alberta, so you have to get it out of the bituminous sands, or it's deep offshore, well down in the deep ocean. So that's the difference. It's the same with natural gas. Conventional natural gas is basically there in gas form. You just have to pump it out of the ground. Unconventional gas, you have to get it out of shale, or you have to, take it out of clathrates or something like that.
Okay. So what those big company that was, producing fossil fuel, what they planning to do with all those resources and all this money that they were investing through the years, to get this fossil fuel resources?
Well, I would say that the smart money is actually getting out the cheap stuff now and using the wealth of today to transform themselves to become energy companies of tomorrow. That is, to transform from fossil fuel based company to renewable based company. That is what I would argue the smart money does. I would say that not smart money doubles down on the continued fossil fuel infrastructure. Look, we are so close globally in terms of completely transforming our transportation sector from gasoline to electric in urban areas very, very, very rapidly. The cost to do so is very, very minor, and we're getting there. I mean, I drive an electric car. I don't know why anybody in the city I live would drive anything other than an electric car, because of the fact it is so easy to drive and cheap to drive, and we get our electricity here from hydro, so it's renewable energy that gets it as well.
That's awesome, Andrew, because a lot of people don't believe that the shift from the fossil fuel transportation to electric can happen quickly, but it actually can, because people, or even the countries, they need to implement this agreement because we're facing the global problem, which is global warming right now. So am I right with this one? So the countries should push to electric cars?
Absolutely. If you look in North America, 25% of North American greenhouse gas emissions come from transportation, largely the personal automobile. Where I live in British Columbia, it's more than 30% of our emissions, and it is such a low-hanging fruit. When you have renewable energy and you have storage systems in cars that are batteries, you can actually get non-emitting transportation relatively straightforward, and it's not expensive. Everyone thinks it's expensive. It's not expensive. Give a specific example of my car. I bought a brand new 2015 Nissan Leaf, all in, including all taxes, for 28,000 Canadian dollars. Mm-hmm. Now, that is substantially cheaper than you would actually get most gas-powered vehicles in British Columbia. Mm-hmm. And not only that, it costs me 1.5 cents a kilometer to drive, as opposed to 15 cents a kilometer to drive a gas car, the typical gas car. So it's 10 times cheaper to drive. And what that means is, in the 10,000 kilometers that I've already done since I've owned this Nissan Leaf, I have essentially saved $1,000 in terms of cost of gas, and goodness knows how many emissions. And it's more fun to drive anyway.
Awesome. Andrew, what will happen if the countries and the politician leaders will not treat it really seriously? What is the threat that is in front of us?
When people ask me why should they be concerned about global warming, there's always two reasons that I give. Number one is the rate at which the climate is changing makes it not possible for many of our ecosystems to adapt. So large-scale, widespread species extinction is in the cards. You know, we already look to the Great Barrier Reef, for example, and it's basically dying. Half of it's already dead anyway, more than half actually. And the second reason is geopolitical instability, because one of the most profound effects of global warming is its effect on water. Wet regions get wetter, dry regions get drier. Those regions, if you look around the world that are typically dry, already are stressed socioeconomically, and this sows the seeds for discontent. So geopolitical instability is another a great problem there. And what do I mean by that is you have people moving to places that, you know, because they can't live where they are anymore, et cetera. Like, think about Lake Chad. When that dries up, as it will, what happens to the people who live around Lake Chad? They want to go somewhere. They didn't cause the problem, yet they're going to have to live the consequence of the problem. And that sows the seeds for geopolitical instability. On top of that, when you add a little bit of, depending on where you are in the world, there's been a growing trend towards income disparity between the very, very wealthy and the very, very poor. And that is never a stable situation. If we look around human history, going back to as long as we can remember, there are ample examples of civilizations rising and falling, And the same pattern always happens. Overextension, disparity between the wealthy and the poor, just sense of entitlement, and then collapse. And that essentially is the path we're on as a industrialized species. Is that we're on a path that will lead to our own internal self-destruction. And frankly, I think we're smarter than say phytoplankton in the ocean, which follow the same path every spring when the nutrients come up and the sun comes out, and they blossom and grow until they sap up all the nutrients and collapse. So people are smarter than that. So rather than following the path of the Mayans, or the path of the Aztecs, or the path of the Incas, or the path of phytoplankton in the ocean, I would have thought that today we would realize that we don't need to have this happen. We're smarter than that.
Okay, Andrew, do you think something really dramatic needs to happen so people really start to understand this is the all of us problem, or do you think we can implement the very big bold changes before anything dramatic will happen?
Well, there's a lot dramatic going to happen anyway, regardless of what we do, because of the kind of warming in store, because of our past behavior. However, there are very, very simple solutions out there. The most simple solution that exists is putting a price on carbon. Right now, it is in every person, in every household, in every municipality, in every city, in every province, in every country, in the world's best interest to do absolutely nothing about global warming, because the costs of action are borne by that individual, and the costs of inaction are distributed amongst 8 billion people in the next generation. It's kind of the mother of all tragedies of the commons. So the way one deals with that, using our existing socioeconomic systems, is to recognize that the atmosphere cannot be regarded as an unregulated trash can with which we can put anything we want into it. And there is a cost associated with using it as a trash can. And that means pricing emissions. I'll give you the analogy I think is quite a good one. Let's suppose that, I'm a neighbor living next door to you, and I have a lot of garbage. And what I do is every day I throw my garbage over the fence into your backyard. I keep doing that. Eventually, you're not going to be able to live there, and you do one of three things. Mm-hmm. You can quietly die where you live, and that's probably not an option. You might move away from where you live in the hope that you might go find somewhere else to live, or you might fight back. against the person who's actually creating the problem for you. And my response to you might be to hire some bodyguards, or I could actually have thought all along, maybe it would have been better if I didn't throw my trash over your fence, and I actually paid a little bit to deal with it. Now, why I say that is the analogy is that the problem, this historic problem, has been caused by the developing world, yet the ramifications of global warming disproportionately affect the developing world. Sorry, the problem is caused by the developed world. The ramifications are disproportionately affecting the developing world, who haven't caused the problem in the first place. And that sows the seed for discontent, which is the seeds of global geopolitical uncertainty. Pricing emissions, meaning putting a cost on using the atmosphere as an unregulated trash can for carbon, would be the biggest incentive we could actually do to transform our energy systems, and solutions would come to the surface rapidly. That's the solution. A global price on carbon that is agreed to with World Trade Organizations and other free trade agreements, allowing jurisdictions to impose carbon tariffs on imports from those jurisdictions that go rogue and don't abide by internal pricing on carbon. That is the solution.
But how people can measure that? Like, for example, I imagine the carbon is also like this. All the people are burning, like because they're using the fossil fuel to, for example, warm their houses, right?
It's very, very easy to measure that. Let me tell you, companies know exactly how much oil they pull out of the ground. They know exactly how much coal they dig up. They know exactly how much gas they get out of the ground. You put the price, when it's there, when you pull it out of the ground, you can put the price on it right there, because there's an assumption. If you pull it out of the ground, it's going to be combusted. Awesome. So you can put a price right there, or you can put it at the other place, which is where you buy it. So it's fossil fuel reserves are really well known. So there's no problem there in terms of figuring that out. It gets a little more subtle in terms of perhaps emissions from landfills, but even those can be measured as well.
Okay, Andrew. So the very important things I wanna talk with you. It's exactly like, for example, about UN global goals, right?
Yeah.
And so, from my perspective, and many friends of mine who want to change the world, what we see when we're going to the global goals, we got so excited about those goals, and after that we get to those, and we actually find out that there's not much we can do actually. Besides keeping the sign, or I support this one, or I don't. So my question is, like, what the normal people, everyday people, could do right now to... That's a great question. And I've been asked that many times. And I always say that there are three things that a person can do right now. Three things. Number one, every single one of us has a wallet and we spend our money. We actually can send a signal to the market in terms of what we value by how we spend our money. I'll give an example in North America. In North America, we never used to have organic food sections in grocery stores. People would have thought you were crazy if you had an organic food section in your grocery store. Slowly but surely, people paid, started demanding it. They were willing to pay a little bit more for it, especially those early adopters. And now it's such that every single grocery store has an organic section in it, because they know they can't compete without, and the price is, in many cases, it's actually less than non-organic food. So that's one example of where using your wallet can change behavior. The electric vehicle is, if you start to buy electric vehicles, it sends a signal to the companies that you want them, and on they come. It's the same thing with, it's throughout our society that works. Number two, the second thing you can do is, in every democratic state, we have the ability to vote. That is, we have the ability to go and put an X on a box for somebody we want. If society believes this is an issue that needs to be dealt with, they need to put it front and center in terms of how they vote. I would argue particularly the youth, because the youth of today, depending on the country you're in,
are not as prone to come out and vote as, say, elderly people. This issue is largely one that is created by my generation and will manifest itself on the next generation. Mm-hmm. Youth should get out and vote en masse and get out and vote for people who will make dealing with this a priority. And the third thing you can do is education. Each and every one of us knows other people, and we can convince other people to use their wallet the way we do, and to vote according to put this as an issue. For example, kids can often get their grandparents to vote for them. Mm-hmm. Much more difficult to get your parents to vote for the way you want. But your grandparents, yeah, they'll do that because grandparents kind of love doing what their grandchildren. They love pleasing their grandchildren. So you can actually bring your grandparents to the poll, for example. So those three things combined with carbon pricing, and I would argue this problem is dealt with.
Sure, Andrew. So, for example, but in case of the wallet, so we can start choosing electric vehicles. What else, and what we can start choosing by our wallet?
Well, goods that are produced locally. When I go to the grocery store, I don't buy produce that comes from anywhere other than close by my home. Why would I want to buy apples from New Zealand when there's perfectly good apples grown in British Columbia? New Zealand apples have to travel all that great distance in boats that are burning fossil fuels. Mm-hmm. Packaging, processed food, things that require energy, buy things that require less energy to make. When I look at, in my house, energy use, lighting, for example, or insulation, or when I look at clothing, I look at least stuff that's produced more locally. Again, when I look at, purchasing a washing machine. We all need washing machines. I look for the efficient one. I look for one that actually is, maybe it's a little more, but it's a little more efficient. These are the type of things. My lawnmower, I don't have a 2-stroke lawnmower. I have a lawnmower to cut my lawn that's electric, battery-powered electric. So most of my appliances are out. My weed eater is electric. It is not gas-powered. So there is so much you can do.
Sure.
And it's fun and exciting to do that because you're always thinking about how you can be innovative.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm going to go even farther. Let's say, what is the most important action? Is it that this stops the fossil fuel or transfer to electric? Is it this one action? Is it this one? Is it this which have the biggest impact? Or this one action or this one change would actually have the biggest impact of all of those?
For the individual or society as a whole?
For society and individual.
For society, it's putting a price on carbon. That is the single biggest issue. Without that, we're not going to deal with this problem. It is a necessary condition to deal with global warming, is to have a global price on carbon emissions. The second thing, from an individual's perspective, mm-hmm. most of and it depends on where you are, where you live. In North America, mm-hmm. the single most important thing a person can do is recognize that 25% of our emissions in North America are from the transportation sector. It's either taking public transit, riding a bike, walking, or using an electric vehicle. Okay. In Europe, depending on where you are, in Poland, for example, I suspect you get a lot of power from coal. One of the things that you can do, would be to move off coal in the short term to natural gas, and in the long term to renewables. These are the kind of the low-hanging fruit that have co-benefits associated with them as well.
Sure, Andrew. So, what I understand, I just want to sum up this. What I understand, the biggest problem right now is fossil fuel.
Correct.
And we need to stop using this or stop polluting by using the fossil fuel, or we need to move to electric. And both actions will be stopping that or not using some things that require fossil fuel or getting to electric. This is the action that we want that actually might solve what the individuals could do as well right now.
Exactly. And the government can show leadership in putting a price on emissions because we need that leadership to actually stimulate the market in the right direction as well, to ensure that we put a price on using the atmosphere as an unregulated dumping ground.
Okay, Andrew, so imagine right now you have 100,000 people and they are ready for doing this. Probably the power of collective goal, if the people have very concrete goal that do this action and it contribute to this one, how do you think, what you would tell those 100,000 people to do? Like one action?
Well, I tell those 100,000 people the same thing that I said to every single person who's asked me what they could do. There are three things you can do, not one thing. That's simplifying it. Number one is use their wallets to drive the market in the direction they want. Number two is get out and vote and ensure that people actually vote for, put this as an issue when you vote for them. And number three, education. Get others to do the same.
Okay, Andrew, what if I would say something like this? Let's get 100,000 people to get a solar panel, and they contribute to the goal only when they're getting the solar panel. What do you think about this?
Good for them, but that might not be the most cost-effective way for them to reduce emissions. In my case, in British Columbia, the most cost-effective way for me to reduce emissions is to buy an electric car. If I'm in Poland and I get a lot of my electricity from coal, perhaps the most cost-effective way is to put a solar installation on my roof. If I'm living in the UK, where perhaps a lot of my heating is coming from natural gas, perhaps the most cost-effective way would be to improve the insulation in my building. It depends on where you are, and that's why I don't think you can have blanket statements for one and all.
I understand. Okay, sure. I'm just exploring and looking for it. So let's imagine that the most of our listeners are people from 24 to 30 years old.
Yeah.
And now they want to do something. And what we can do, we can, get 100,000 people to, for example, send a petition somewhere. We can, for example, so we cannot afford for electric car. We cannot afford yet for some expensive stuff. But what we could do, for example, or what do we think we could do? There is the solar panels, for example, for $10. And you can charge the phone. And I understand it's not solving the problem, but my question is, imagine that people starting to getting with those little solar panels and they carrying with them, and everybody is asking why they communicate this is important. And so do you think it might be a good idea for start spreading awareness and things like that?
Sure, but I think if you're talking about young people,
yes.
Young people typically don't have as much money, disposable income. I think, if you tell those 100,000 young people to go and talk to their grandparents and get them to spend $10,000 putting a solar installation on their roof, they probably have a much greater impact, and they have more disposable income. Young people, I would argue, are not the problem. The problem is my generation, that are intransient in terms of changing our ways. So I would suggest that young people use their power of persuasion through communication, through voting, which they don't do, to get my generation to get out of the way and move towards transitioning fossil fuels. Because the young people are going to inherit the problem, yet they're not part of our decision-making process today.
Okay, so we can convince our parents and grandparents to stop using the fossil fuel, to stop burning, using the fossil fuel to heat our houses, get electric cars, get a roof solar installation, and start buying locally, and we can start also educating other people, like our parents, friends, and other people around us. Is that right?
Perfect.
Okay, what about, can we do something, this last question, Andrew, I know you need to go. Can we do something to influence the governments to put this carbon tax? Let's say if 100,000 people will send 100,000 letters to the Canadian or American government, do you think it will make any difference or not?
Yes, it will make a huge difference, because the people who the governments are listening to are their donors. They're the big corporations. They're not the little people who they're actually supposed to be representing. So when people who are actually right to their governments, they begin to respond and listen. That is critical, because governments are there and elected by the people for the people. Many politicians get really, really worrying if they start to recognize that their constituents who voted them in are saying do something that their government's not doing. They start to speak within and to try to drive that direction. So yes, I would encourage everyone to email their elected local representatives to make this an issue.
To the local representative, or for example, let's say if government here in Poland is in capital city, should I send letter there, or because it might be interesting. You are not the first person saying that might actually work, and we have that power because what I also know that sending the one petition with 100,000 signs doesn't work that well if 100,000 like separate letters. Is that right?
100,000 separate letters, particularly if they're handwritten and not email chain letters, has an influence. What is done very often here in BC and is effective is that we have a parliamentary system whereby we have a local representative and we have a cabinet. So if, let's suppose, somebody in Oak Bay, where I represent, has an issue, they'd send me a letter, and they'd send a letter to the premier, and they'd send a letter to the minister responsible for the actual portfolio. So there'd be 3 letters that went out. So, but you want to ensure that your representative in the government is also aware of the issue, because ultimately they were elected by you. I've got to split, but it's a wonderful interview. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Andrew. Great to have you here, and hopefully speak to you soon.
Yes, thanks, Pawel. Talk later.
You.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.